Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 10 essential orchestral suites for beginners. And I'm talking about romantic orchestral suites, not Baroque orchestral suites, which were sort of written in the 18th century, and they're quite different. That's a whole different kettle of beans, which will be the topic of a different chat. We will deal with them at some point. But right now, I'm talking about, the ones we all know and love, what we call a suite. What is a suite? Let's talk about suites, shall we? The word suite really comes from the French, actually, suivre, suite, to follow, that which comes after the overture. And ordinarily, originally, back in the Baroque period, a suite was an overture. It was an opening introductory kind of thing, and then a selection of dances. But later in the universe, suites simply became a selection of objects from a larger score. Normally a theatrical score, an opera, a ballet, a play, a theatrical sort of, just a regular play, because, back in those days, you have to remember, when we didn't have recordings and we didn't have film music, composers wrote it to be played live. The idea of having action on stage with music backing it, or music acting as interludes or setting the scene, that isn't new. That didn't come with Hollywood. Hollywood took it from a hundreds-year-old tradition of providing music for theatrical productions. And so if that music was substantial and really good and had some fabulous tunes and wonderful moments, composers would extract a suite to be played independently as an orchestral piece. So these suites are all quasi-programmatic. In other words, they illustrate something, number one. And number two, they have no set form. They can have any number of movements or sections, and these can be either actual descriptions of action or things going on stage, or they could simply be overtures and interludes, or intermezzi, as they were called, things you played like an intermission or before the curtain went up. There's no rule as to what goes into a suite. They only have to have fabulous music, and these pieces do. Now, some of these will be extremely familiar to you, some of them will be less familiar to you, but they're all really, really great. They contain fabulous, colorful music, often symphonic in length, sometimes symphonic in substance. That is, some of them could be very extended and highly developed movements, and sometimes they're just characterful and charming and delicious. So without further ado, let's go through our list, which you can see down below. We have to begin with Grieg Peer Gynt suites. There are two of them. I put them both on the list. They're beautiful. Peer Gynt is sort of the Norwegian, national story play poem thing. It's about a ne'er-do-well guy who runs away and has lots of crazy adventures, and then returns home to his sweetheart, sort of, spent and drained by his experiences. But he eventually comes home to the long-suffering, waiting girlfriend, and her name is I forget what her name is. Let's see, there's Ozzy, that's his mother. There's Anitra, who does like the hoochie coochie dance. Solveig, her name is Solveig, that's her name. So there you go. And she sings to him at the very end of the Peer Gynt suites. Now, the two suites have 4 movements each. I did a video on the first suite, a series of videos on how to listen to great music. And if you're a beginner, I recommend those videos because, first of all, I play all of the music. And second of all, we talk about, how the suite is put together and what the music sounds like and what makes it special and what you should listen for and all of those things. It's in the playlist of classical music for beginners. And I think that maybe it would be very helpful if you took a look at that. So that's another reason why I wanted to begin with those pieces. They are so beautiful, and they are ubiquitous. In the Hall of the Mountain King and the morning section, they've been a million television commercials. I mean, you can't advertise salad dressing without Morning from Peer Gynt. And in the Hall of the Mountain King, do 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 do. I mean, I don't know why everyone uses it, but everybody uses it. It's all over the place. Fabulous music. So, Grieg Peer Gynt is number one. Number two, Bizet. I just did a talk on Carmen, and Carmen also has two suites, or a giant bunch of movements that have been, arranged into two suites. Sometimes people just play them all at once in a lump. So that's why we're not doing Carmen. I've talked about Carmen endlessly. If you want to know the Carmen suites, go listen to the Carmen suites. They're often coupled with these, l'Arlésienne. Now, l'Arlésienne simply means the woman from the town of Arles. And Bizet wrote a whole big, long score. I mean, most of these theatrical scores, if you play all the music, they include dances and songs and interludes and all kinds of things. They could be like, more than an hour long. He wrote a big pile of music for this play, The Woman from Arles. And then he extracted some of it and enlarged it, because the original scoring was for a small pit orchestra, theater pit, and they are wonderful. He wrote one suite, and then after his death, another suite was compiled, and the tunes are fabulous. The main theme of the suite is actually an old French Christmas carol, which some of you may know the tune. Dum bum ba ba dum ba dum ba da 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 da. I mean, it's really, really lovely music. So the Bizet l'Arlésienne suites are as well known just about as the Peer Gynt suites for their wonderful melodies. He uses a saxophone in one of them. Sometimes you find all kinds of nifty instruments, and the saxophone was a new invention back then in the 1860-ish period. And the music is simply fabulous. So there are two l'Arlésienne suites by Bizet, and you could give those a shot as well. They often come coupled on disc, by the way, with the Carmen suites. So if you're not doing downloads, if you're buying physical product, you may wind up with Carmen anyway. Somehow you always wind up with Carmen. Carmen is ubiquitous. Next, we're staying in France. Ravel, Mother Goose. Now, Mother Goose exists in a couple of versions as well. Because Ravel initially wrote it as 5 sort of children's pieces for piano, two pianos, or piano 4 hands, or all I know is that you need 4 appendages to play it. And there's a solo piano version, which I actually used to play on the piano, believe it or not. Not very well, but I attempted some of it. And then he expanded it into a full-length ballet, which is about half an hour long, adding interludes and some other special pieces that were not part of the initial suite. And then eventually, he also orchestrated the initial 5 pieces. And so that's what I'm talking about. But this is very interesting, because most of the time, you have a large work and a composer extracts a suite. Well, here's the opposite. He started with a suite and he turned it into a larger work. I mean, it can go both ways. But Mother Goose is, they're characters from Mother Goose stories. In French, it's ma mère l'oie, my mom, the goose. And the music is just incredibly haunting and unbelievably beautiful and exquisitely scored. And the last movement, the Fairy Garden, is just one of the most hauntingly beautiful pieces that anybody ever wrote. It's unforgettably beautiful. And the middle one, L'Eranette, Impératrice des Pagodes, it's the ugly little empress of the pagodas, which is full of Orientalisms and has a wonderful gong part and tinkling percussion. It's just so beautiful and so much fun to listen to. So it's a piece you really ought to know, and you're going to love it. You're really going to love it. Next, well, of course, what other suite could we have? The Tchaikovsky Nutcracker. The Nutcracker is the other suite that is so well known that it needs no introduction. The music from the Nutcracker suite actually comes from the second act of the ballet. There's a little opening bit, which is from the beginning of the ballet, but most of it is all from what they call the divertissement. When ballets, or classical ballets especially, have, well, let's just call it rather loose plots. I mean, in the Nutcracker, everything happens in Act One. It has two acts. In Act One, Clara gets the toy Nutcracker. Then there's the whole dream sequence where the Christmas tree grows up and the mice are the bad guys, and the Nutcracker becomes the hero and kills them. Well, Clara kills the Mouse King to rescue the Nutcracker, and the Nutcracker becomes a prince, and the prince. In Act Two, that's Act One. That's where everything happens. There's the battle and the stuff and the kids and Christmas and the presentation of the presents, and it's all that business. Once that's out of the way, the prince takes Clara off to Candyland, and all they do is sit on a bench for the entire act like this. They're ballet people. They can't just sit there like this. They sit there in a pose. They have their feet pointed and toes pointed, and they sit on this bench and people dance. And that's Act Two. It has nothing to do with the plot. It's just the dances. And that's what's in the Nutcracker Suite for the most part. Mostly it's those dances that form part of the divertissement. And not all of them. There's some other ones. If you listen to the complete Nutcracker, you may find a couple more that you're not familiar with. But the music, it's just so marvelous. My goodness, Tchaikovsky was a genius. The tunes are incredible. The orchestration is incredible. It's become so much a part of our musical life and musical culture that you may find that you know all of it, even though you may not know where all of it is from. I mean, you've probably heard it somewhere, and it's doesn't need a recommendation from me. So moving right along, Carl Nielsen, the Danish national composer, Denmark's big guy. Every Scandinavian country sort of has one. The Norwegians had Grieg, the Finns had Sibelius. Sweden, well, they're sort of stuck in the middle there somewhere. They had a couple fairly, very good composers who wrote lots of suites, but we'll deal with that at another time. Denmark had Carl Nielsen, and Nielsen's big theatrical suite is Aladdin. Yeah, Aladdin. We know the story. It's Aladdin, and it's another one of those wonderful fake Orientalist works. I love it when composers do fake anything. All the composers who wrote fake Spanish music, even though they never went to Spain, and they all do fake Asian, Chinese, exotic, Oriental type music, even though they never went to the Orient. They don't need to. You don't need to go. We have music to take us there. The Aladdin Suite is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It comes with or without a wordless woman's choir. It doesn't make any difference whether it's there or not. And the music is the same either way. And it is just one of these big, ballsy, athletic, characterful tunes. It begins with this gigantic, exciting march and ends with a I don't know. It's a thing. It's just a dance thing. It's tremendously exciting. Nielsen's music is athletic. It has rhythm, lots and lots of rhythm and color. And he's also very interested sometimes in doing surprisingly modern things. He was basically a fairly conservative composer in the first couple of decades of the 20th century, but he liked opposing different melodic elements that have freedom to play over as many times as they want and whatnot. So there is a scene here, the market at Isfahan or something like that, where everybody has their own tune. And they come in one at a time and they play it over again as many times as they want until you get this wonderfully, busy jumble of music, like a busy marketplace where you hear things coming at you from all ends and then it just stops suddenly. It's wonderful stuff. So the Nielsen Aladdin Suite is definitely something you're going to want to hear. It was a huge discovery for me. I remember how vividly, when I first heard it, I didn't know it. It actually was recorded by Bizet with Myung-Whun Chung, coupled to the Second Symphony. It was one of the first CDs that was available. And, Bizet does stunning work sonically. And I didn't know what to expect. And I just put this thing on. And I was like, wow, this is hot stuff. That march came pounding in, boom, crash, da-da, bash, da, boom, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I was hooked. And you will be too. It's an amazing piece of music. Okay, now we have another sort of familiar, well, what used to be familiar for classical American pops people, but really it's a great work. Grofé, Faraday Grofé, who's famous because he orchestrated Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. He wrote a lot of original music. Some of it's fabulous, some of it's atrocious. The Grand Canyon Suite is his masterpiece. It's really, really cool. It's a wonderful piece, and everybody sort of knows On the Trail, that particular movement that goes boom ba boom ba boom ba do 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 ba boom ba boom ba do 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 ba do 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 da do 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 do, with a couple of cocoa shells going, like that. It's just phenomenal. You've got dawn, you've got sunset, you have a storm, you have your ride along the trail, you've got the painted desert. Oh, it's so picturesque and evocative. But Grofé was a composer in that sort of modern, well, in those days, 1920s, say, 20s and 30s, this sort of jazz pop style that Gershwin did too. So the harmonies are interesting, and it's a tough piece to play too. People don't realize just how virtuosic it is. It's extremely virtuosic, and it's absolutely brilliant. And if you are not one of my American viewers and you don't know it, listen to the Grand Canyon Suite. You're in for a real treat. It's one of those sort of hidden gems that doesn't get as much attention because Americans are so down on their own music and so insecure and emotionally needy and desperate for it, that they tend to disregard or disdain their own best and most evocative and typical creations. It's such a sad situation, but we don't have to deal with that. Listen to the Grand Canyon Suite and you're in business. Next, let's do something by Stravinsky. This is a ballet suite, and the ballet in question is Pulcinella. Now, Pulcinella is a ballet with songs. It has singers in it. And it's based on Italian Baroque music. Stravinsky thought the Italian Baroque composer he was building on was Pergolesi, but it's not. A little bit Pergolesi. It's mostly a guy named Domenico Gallo. We found out later. Stravinsky didn't know that at the time, and he wrote a bunch of trio sonatas, chamber works for violin and accompaniment in 3 parts. They're called trio sonatas because, even if they're basically just for one violin, or, you get 3 parts. You have a violin and you have the right hand of the piano or the harpsichord, or the left hand of the harpsichord with a cello or something on the bass line. So you've got 3 musical lines. That's where the trio comes from. The number of players in a trio sonata can be anything from like 2 to 5, depending on what the scoring is. But anyway, and some of these I think are for 2 violins. Anyway, they're charming works, delightful works, and Stravinsky adapted them in his own style, reorchestrating them for a lovely chamber ensemble and adding all kinds of rhythmic pizzazz. But the fascinating thing about Pulcinella is that he didn't actually change them very much. All of the charm and melodic content and a lot of the rhythmic verve is there in the originals. And you can hear them. I mean, they're on YouTube. If you look up Domenico Gallo, Gallo, and after you listen to your Pulcinella suite, you'll be fascinated to make the comparison. I did a video about it, by the way, which you can also go and listen to. But Pulcinella is just fresh and charming and full of high spirits. It's brilliant, and the suite is marvelous. It consists of most of the ballet with the songs taken out, because you need 3 soloists if you're going to do the whole ballet. And the suite is sort of all the music that doesn't have the soloists. It's a wonderful work. It's pretty substantial. It has a bunch of movements, and I don't know, 8 or 9 or 10 or so, and it lasts about half an hour, 25 minutes, half an hour. It's a serious work. And gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. Once you've heard it, you won't be able to get it out of your head. It has such great tunes, and they're so fresh sounding, the way Stravinsky arranges them. They're all full of bright colors and really beautiful woodwind sonorities, and it's fabulous. So after Stravinsky, we're going to do some Sibelius. You got to do. Sibelius was one of the great suite composers because he wrote a lot of music for the theater. And so he made a lot of suites. There are, I don't know, how many are there? my goodness, I never really counted them, but there's more than half a dozen, and of various types, and pieces that would qualify as suites, even if you didn't call them that. And I'm talking, at least for our purposes in this particular chat, I've listed the Karelia suite, which is based on supposedly a Finnish theme, but it doesn't use any real Finnish folk music. Actually, if you have the whole thing, there is kind of a Finnish folk moment. Sibelius almost never used folk music. He invented it. He invented his own. He created a Finnish folk style for his, most mythologically inspired and primal Finnish works. Karelia is not actually one of those. His theatrical music is just fun, great theatrical music, full of good tunes. The Karelia suite has 3 movements, and it begins with an intermezzo, which is actually a march, with one of the best tunes you've ever heard in your life. I mean, they all do, actually. I mean, this is such wonderful music in terms of melody. I know it's another one of those pieces that once you get it in your head, you won't get it out. You're going to be running around going da ba dum bum bum ba da dum bum bum ba da dum bum bum ba. That's the first movement, and the middle movement is a ballad, which is actually sung in the original score, but it's beautifully set for orchestra. And then the last movement, which is a march, do 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 ba 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 da 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 da. Oh my God, it's catchy. It's just insanely catchy. It's wonderful. So the Karelia suite is another one of those things you just ought to know and will enjoy getting to know, and probably it'll be on a disc with like lots of other Sibelius incidental music or other suites, and they're all worth listening to. So what the heck, just follow where Karelia leads and you'll be in sweet heaven. I guarantee it. Next, Dvorak. Oh God, yeah, the Czech suite. This is a romantic nationalist suite. It doesn't come from anything else. It was just invented as a suite. There are certain suites that composers wrote when they just wanted to put together a piece of a bunch of orchestral pieces on a similar theme, and it's not a symphony. So what is it? If it's not a symphony, well, you could call it a serenade. That happens. Dvorak wrote a couple of those. Or you can call it a suite. And this is a suite because it focuses on dance music, on characteristic, in this case, nationalistic Czech dance music. It begins with a beautifully serene pastoral. The tunes in this piece are it's like all of these suites. They're characterized by their exceptional tunefulness and memorability. The Czech suite, for some reason, isn't much played anymore. It's not well known. And oh my God, it should be. It is so beautiful. There's a romance in this piece. It's the 4th movement. There are 5 movements. And it's a duet, basically, for flute and English horn that is one of the most hauntingly beautiful, I use haunting all the time, one of the most beautifully beautiful things you will ever hear in your life. It's just the most gorgeous tune. And the finale is a Czech dance called a furiant. Dum bum ba dum bum ba da dum bum ba dum bum ba dum bum ba da dum bum ba. You just, again, these tunes will get stuck in your brain, and you will be so happy that they're there. Because if you happen to be like sitting in a doctor's waiting room or bored out of your mind and you don't have your earbuds, you can just play them in your head. And if you do have your earbuds, you can just play them. And that's even better. So Dvorak's Czech suite is really one of those pieces that you ought to know. It's just because these are lighter pieces. They're lighter music. People, the classical tradition, we only like things that are sublime, things that are big and weighty and heavy and overwrought sometimes and grandiose. No, don't go there. Don't go there. Love the music that loves you back. It's such a joy to be able to hear these pieces that are relaxing and show no less craftsmanship, no less effort, no less mastery than, pieces that are about, death and God and, screaming hysteria. You don't need any of that. You can just relax and wallow, and it's just as legitimate and just as beautiful and valid and significant and wonderful. However, we are closing with one, sort of humongo mother suite. It's not long, but in terms of size and volume, Prokofiev, his Scythian suite. Now, the Scythian suite has a wonderful history. Stravinsky wrote The Rite of Spring, that revolutionary ballet, for the Ballet Russe. It was really quite an event in the history of balletdom, and it caused a furor, an absolute sensation. Now, Prokofiev was a young Russian composer, and Stravinsky was sort of viewed askance in Russia itself because he left Russia and he didn't go back until well after the revolution, actually after the Second World War. And in Russia, he was regarded as something of a traitor, someone who ran away and made himself famous using all of these Russian folk tunes and things that Russian composers had known forever and had been using all along. But Stravinsky got the credit for it because he was in the West. And so there was a certain amount of one-upsmanship going on in Russian musical circles, and Prokofiev was a young firebrand, and he observed The Rite of Spring, which popped up around 1913-ish or somewhere in there, and he said, "Oh, I can do that." And so he wrote an equally huge orchestra, extravagant, modernist, crazy, dissident, wild sort of thing called Alla and Lolly. And it's based on a Russian folk story. And Diaghilev, the impresario who had commissioned it, took one look at it and said, "No, we're not doing that. No way are we doing that." And so Prokofiev refashioned the music for the ballet, which was never performed and never actually finished in its whatever form Prokofiev intended it. It became the Scythian suite in 4 movements. And boy, is it wild. It was used as much of the soundtrack, along with other Prokofiev suites like Lieutenant Kijé, the film score suite, and some other things in Woody Allen's Russian comedy Love and Death. It was you'll hear it if you know Woody Allen's Love and Death, then you know the Scythian suite. It was the war music, and it's about well, it doesn't matter what it's about. It has a fabulous movement called Night, which used to be the theme music for the late night show on WQXR radio or WNCN1. There used to be a couple classical stations in New York. Only one of them is left, but they had a midnight show, and the music for that was Prokofiev's Night. So some of you may recognize that, but the opening movement is just crazy, and the war movement, ba 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 da 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 da. You may have heard that too. It's used in a lot of marchy, warlike contexts, and it's popped up in commercials and movies, and like I said, and other things. It's a brilliant piece, and it ends with this huge sunrise. It's a great way to end our chat on suites, because it begins with just the dawn of a new era. It's your new era of suitedom. You are listening to all of the fabulous suites that are out there, and you're going to have a great time because there's just an endless quantity of them. And these are 10 of the most magnetic, but I could have done a list of 100. And I will say what I always say with these lists: don't suggest any more, please. 10 is enough. There's actually 12 because some of these have 2 suites. It's plenty of suites to get started, to get your listening going. And so for the more experienced out there, put a lid on it. And for the beginners, keep on listening. Thank you for joining me. Take care.